Hey, Cataylst students, this is Jack. We're really excited for this week and the content we have for you and for the message to lean into what God has for that. Also, a quick reminder about Tuesday lunches. We'll be doing those till the end of June, those this summer instead of going to actual restaurants. We're asking you guys to bring your own lunch and meet us at the Sherwood Fire Pit each Tuesday during June to hang out and play some games and spend time together. Thanks, guys. Enjoy.
I was lost, but he brought me in. His love for me, oh, his love for me. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. Free at last, he has ransomed me, his grace runs deep. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me. Yes, he died for me. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God, yes I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. Yes, I am who you say I am. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God, yes I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God, yes I am.
Welcome to Cataylst Online. I'm Tyler Cadwell, and this is our intern, Jack Stanley. We call him Jackalus, and that's not true, but
First time it's ever come up.
Yep.
That's great.
Yep.
Let's stick with it.
Today, we're going to talk about how you belong, and you are a child of God. We're going to unpack what it looks like to be a child of God and what it looks like to have that belonging. But before we really dive into that, we're going to kind of ask you guys the question. I'm really going to ask Jack the question. I want you at home to think through it. So when was a time that you felt you couldn't go any further? You couldn't go any further, and what did you do?
I tend to feel like this a lot towards the end of a school semester, both with like things I'm involved in. There's a lot of events to go to, a lot of things to be praying for, and then there's also a lot of like homework and stuff like that to get done. And it can kind of feel like when you're in the home stretch, like if there was only one more week of school, I don't know if I could do it. This is quite a lot. What I do sometimes though in those situations, I just kind of, for whatever reason, I just look to myself to try and get through it. Like, oh, you know what, I need to hunker down and just like find the strength within me to get it done, which ends up with me feeling more exhausted than before.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for me, I've definitely felt that way. Like I couldn't go any further. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to do anything more. That came in a point just a few years ago, really, where, things weren't as bad as I really thought and really felt, but, I was working full time, I was coaching football, and my girlfriend had broke up with me, and it was just a really down time, and that break wasn't clean for me. It probably was for her, but some of the things that she said really hurt me. And I kind of just felt like I can't go any further. I cannot go. I cannot move any further. And what I did, kind of like you said, is just kind of go up into myself of why can't I move? Why can't I get through this? And over time, what that turned into is really me pursuing God, and it ended up I'm in a much better spot than I ever was, but in that time, that was really tough. So, what was your time? What was a moment that you couldn't go any further? Welcome to part 2 of this conversation, talking about how you are a child of God and that you belong. We're not taking this theme out of nowhere. It is written many, many places throughout the Bible that you are a child of God, or that we have the opportunity to be children of God that are adopted into God's family. I want to share a passage that talks about that. So Ephesians 1:4 kind of talks about this. For he chose us in him before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless in his sight. In love, he predestined us for adoption to sonship and daughtership through Jesus Christ, in accordance with his pleasure and will, to all praise of the glorious grace which he has freely given us in the one he loves. In him we have redemption through his blood and forgiveness of sins in accordance with the riches of God's grace. There's a lot more to that, and a lot more that we can really dive into. But I think what I like to do better is dive into stories that show this. And there's one story in 1 Kings 18, 19 area that we're going to talk through about a prophet. And he was a child of God, and he really models what that looks like to be a child of God. And God models what it looks like to be God the Father in those moments. And so we're excited to kind of dive into that. So Jack, you want to give us a little overview of the context of where we're at with that?
Yeah, so this prophet we're talking about is Elijah. Elijah was a prophet in the land of Israel in the time when Judah and Israel were split in 2 nations. And at that time, the king of Israel was Ahab. And the Bible talks in this part of the story about how Ahab did more to displease and anger God than any other king before him. And primarily we see that in the way he marries a woman from Sidon. She's a Sidonian named Jezebel, not Jezreel. That's the place that he ends up going to. You want to read it? I don't know. You want to?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. He marries Jezebel. And Jezebel brought with her into this marriage and encouraged Ahab to worship Baal, to worship another goddess named Asherah. And this worship led them to sacrifice, human sacrifice, in particular child sacrifice. So a lot of just evil going on in the kingdom of Israel, which is supposed to be worshiping God, who would never, ever command such a thing. So Elijah comes into the scene to confront this injustice, to confront what Ahab is doing. And he says that God is going to bring a drought on the land because of what they're doing. And that's exactly what happens. Elijah flees the scene. God causes a drought to happen in the land for 3 years. And then, of course, you probably know the story when Elijah comes back. That's the story when he challenges the prophets of Baal. They set up a sacrifice on Mount Carmel. and whoever's God causes fire to come down on the altar and on the sacrifice will be the one true God. So of course the prophets of Baal go first. They're worshiping Baal. They're trying to get Baal to make fire come down, and it doesn't happen. And then Elijah comes in and he prays simply. He even pours water on the altar, and then God causes fire to come down. And after that, Elijah gets the rest of the nation, those who are on his side, to actually kill all the prophets of Baal. That angers King Ahab and his wife Jezebel, so Elijah has to flee the scene, and his life is in danger. He has nowhere to eat, nowhere to live, and he's on the run in the wilderness, and that's where we find him here in this story.
Yeah, and there's so much more context to the story that he has, and there's a great resource that talks about that. It's the Bema Discipleship Podcast, and I believe it's episode 72 that talks more about the context of Elijah and all the things that are going on, the evil and the injustice, to give you a better picture of that, but we're not trying to go in depth there. But as we get into chapter 19 there, we see that he's on the run, and I believe there's a passage that even talks about how he's had enough. So we get to that point where Elijah says, I give up, I'm done, and God's basically like, no, you're not. So what happens there is he falls asleep right after he says, Lord, I'm done, and an angel of the Lord appears and starts to take care of him. So before we get more into that, I want to ask, if you were Elijah and you were at the end of your rope, what would you need most in that moment? And that can be peace and quiet, physical replenishment, a spiritual retreat, an attitude adjustment, some answers about life, fellowship with other believers, or a fresh vision from God or of God. What would you need most? I think what I would have needed most in that time is kind of assurance. Like when I'm at the end of my rope, and in my personality, I would need, like, does this make a difference? Am I doing what you want me to do, Lord? Like, I would need assurance of that, or want assurance of that. And at the very least, some word that he is with me.
Yeah.
In that.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, in a similar way, I think, and if I'm in a situation that's a bit similar to that at all, I would need encouragement, like a reminder that God, like you just said, like God is still with me, and that he still has a purpose and a plan. He still wants me to be doing things for him.
Yeah.
And I would need his Holy Spirit to give me that encouragement, also the energy to keep going, to overcome that discouragement and that, I don't know, that hopelessness I feel.
Yeah. So that's a huge thing. Like, I feel like we can get to the spot of feeling hopeless when we look around and see injustice and see all this other stuff. So as someone that is a child of God, like, let's see how God takes care of Elijah. And like I kind of alluded to earlier, he has this moment, and then right after this moment that he has of, I can't do it anymore, an angel, like, he falls asleep, and an angel of the Lord wakes him up, serves him a meal, and tells him, go back to sleep. And then he wakes up, angel serves him the meal, tells him to go back to sleep. And so at that time, he needed, like, physical replenishment, and God was feeding him and provided by sending this angel to feed him and let him rest. And it keeps it going, and it keeps going. Can you tell us a little bit more from?
Yeah, so God, he asks Elijah, what are you doing here in the wilderness? Like, why are you here? And Elijah responds with a complaint, essentially, saying, God, here's where I'm at. Everybody else is dead who's following you. It's just me, and I'm the only one who's acting righteous right now. I'm the only one who's standing up for what's right. And then God tells him to go onto a mountain and to wait for him. And this is like that famous story there where God, I'll just read the passage here actually, starting in verse 11, it says, "And he said, go out and stand on the mount before the Lord, and behold, the Lord passed by. And a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper." So that's just like, it's a God saying, I'm going to answer you. And Elijah comes at God with this loud, boisterous complaint. And like God answers him with these other loud things. Like there's an earthquake, there's wind, and then there's a fire. Like Elijah's this image of a fiery prophet, like literally fire coming down from heaven on the sacrifice, right? But God isn't in any of those things. Instead of God meeting him with this loud response as well, he meets him with a whisper, this intimate, close whisper. And then God asks him the same question, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And what's funny is Elijah responds in the same exact way, as though not even responding to what God just did there. He complains again in the same exact words. But we see in this picture, I believe, God responding to his child with what he needs, with comfort, with relationship, with an intimate conversation. And the funny thing is, you'd expect Elijah to have his heart soften there and say, "Okay, you're right. I need to turn back to you, God. I need to trust in you." But then he's still angry with God. And the thing is that God still takes it. God still handles it. And he can handle any frustration that Elijah or even us were able to throw at him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so important to realize that as children of God, when we approach God in strong emotion, he understands why we are so emotional about that thing. And I think what God really wants is that honesty and not, God, I'm fine. You know, like you fight through the emotion to act okay. I think what he wants is that honesty. And so like he honors that in the story and says, "Look, I'm with you. Are you listening? Right. I know you see all these big things happening, but I'm with you. Do you hear me?" And Elijah responds with a lot more loudness, and he's like, "I'm with you," you know. And it doesn't really say what the voice exactly says, right? It just says he answered in a whisper, right? Yeah. And so we don't know what exactly God said in that whisper, but I have a feeling it was something of like not necessarily that word for word, but something like, "I'm with you, Elijah." Like, how can we work through this together? You know? Right. And I think that's just so important. Now, I think we have a two-part question here. What message is there in the story for you? So be thinking about that. What message is there in this story for you? And what do you need to do most right now? So the two-part question, what in this message what in this story, what message for you is there in this story for you? And what do you need most right now? So, Jack, what do you think? What is in this message for you, man? And I'm going to throw out a few options for you who are listening as we're thinking through and while you're thinking through. I need to be quiet so I can hear God. Sometimes God speaks in a gentle whisper. I may feel like I'm alone, but I'm not. God is with me, and God will refresh and sustain me. So that's for the first one. And you can say other, too. The second question, what do you need most right now? Maybe you need a good night's sleep. Maybe you need physical refreshment. Maybe you need spiritual refreshment. And maybe you need to hear from God, or again, other. Jack, what do you think? What is in this message for you, man? And I'm going to throw out a few options for you who are listening as we're thinking through and while you're thinking through. I need to be quiet so I can hear God. Sometimes God speaks in a gentle whisper. I may feel like I'm alone, but I'm not. God is with me, and God will refresh and sustain me. So that's for the first one. And you can say other, too. The second question, what do you need most right now? Maybe you need a good night's sleep. Maybe you need physical refreshment. Maybe you need spiritual refreshment. And maybe you need to hear from God, or again, other. So, Jack, I ask you, what message is there for you in this story?
Yeah, I think the message that I'm taking away here is that, like we just talked about, God can handle an honest response. And in fact, when I come to God with my honest feelings and emotions, that's when He can actually work with me.
Yeah.
Because now I'm being real before God. And then in that case, that God's able to remind me that He's the one who sustains me alone. So I love that last point, that possibility you brought up there is like, if I'm going to be looking to myself and I'm tired, I'm only going to get more tired.
Yeah.
It's only going to get worse. It's only going to get more frustrating. But if God is my sustenance, if God is the one providing what I need, then He takes care of everything else. And I start to see that as I start to walk more in step with the Lord, things aren't so exhausting anymore. In fact, I'm seeing more purpose in what's going on. Things seem to be falling in place more. Not because I'm doing it, not because I've gotten better, but because the Lord is leading me. I'm not trying to lead and then ask God to bless it.
Right. Yeah, that's so good. I think for me is I just need the reminder that God speaks in a whisper, and I need to I need to be still and search for that.
Yep.
I think for me it's so easy to get caught up in the busyness and the next thing that sometimes I forget to still myself before God and listen.
Yep.
And how about that second question? What do you need most right now?
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. That spiritual refreshment and to hear from God, both of those things is just, like you just said, God speaks in a whisper. Like, how often am I giving God a chance to actually speak in a whisper to me? Yeah. How often am I being quiet before God, asking Him to answer all these questions that are always rolling around in my head? I can't answer them on my own. So what I think I need most is just to stop trying to find an answer and to submit it to God and just wait for His response.
Yeah, I think I need that as well, and I think honestly I need good sleep. Some seasons of life it's really hard for me to sleep, and I've been in that season. I just need literally a good night's sleep, that physical replenishment that gives you. I need that right now, and it's hard. And I think no matter where we are in this, whatever you answer, I think looking at the current state of what's going on in our world, and I think that we all kind of need a good night's sleep, because we're all thinking about, well, how can we be a part of the solution? How can we be a part of what's next? How can we be a part of helping others? And I think for me, that gets my mind going, and I'm like, okay, well, how have I been a part of the problem, and how can I be a part of the solution? And yeah, I don't know. What do you think? Any other thoughts?
No, I mean, like we've been talking about, if we're talking about we need rest, we need answers on how to be part of the solution like you're talking about here, we can't figure that out on our own. I think the Lord will address our own hearts in an intimate whisper, and in an intimate relationship. And then that's when change can happen, because that's what's going to heal ourselves internally, and then lead us to heal externally as well. Yeah,
I think absolutely. And I think the last thing I want to say before we end this is that relationship, we have to be open to that relationship and allowing God to speak that truth into our lives, because if we're not, then nothing's going to change. We have to be able to look at ourselves and like you said this week, look at ourselves, examine ourselves, and that comes from allowing God into our hearts, and not just saying, I'm the best there ever was. It's saying, Lord, like, I'm humble before you. Like, how can I be a part of the solution? Like, how can I build this relationship with you to be the bridge to everyone on your behalf? Yeah. So, hey, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll catch you next week.